Hey, asphalt fans, it's Jeff Richfield from Roofers United, and today we are here with Reed Ripple, CEO of NRCA, and we're really excited, and we know that you are, to hear what he has to share on godly character in the marketplace, how that affects our industry, and how we can reshape that by seeking wisdom, discipline, and the virtues that the Bible talks about. So, Reed, welcome here today. How you doing?
It's good to be here with you, Jeff. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah.
Great.
You came out from near Cookeville?
Yeah, closer to Smithville,
Well,
but sure.
I'm grateful that you live in Nashville so that you
Yeah.
can come down and visit us
It's
often.
good to see you.
So yeah, Roofers United, what we're here to talk about today is godly character in the marketplace.
Right.
So
Let's do it.
yeah, I wanted to start off and just jump right into our theme, which is character in the community of roofing, and what it was like when you were, rounded about as a young lad back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and you had a roof company that did very well. The atmosphere back then may have been a little different than it is now in garnering respectability in the roofing industry. Tell us what it was like then as you feel it is compared to now.
Yeah, I don't know that from a character standpoint that a lot has actually changed. To be honest with you, character is something that men and women either have. They're either purposeful about it.
That's right.
They've either been taught about it, and that's how they run and live their lives.
Right.
But I remember as a young business guy at age 22, 23, 24, and wanting to run a company that had a lot of character to it,
Right.
and do what we said and deliver what we promised. I often would complain about some of my competition, and you wonder, how does God let them be so successful? Even when I see that they're doing things that don't have a lot of character. And so, but it wasn't my job to be the character police. It's not my job to be the character police today, except in my own life. And so I believe that at the end of the day, customers see it and reputations see it. And the entire customer experience that is delivered by a company that's filled with character is different than one that isn't. And so that reputation then begins to snowball in a community.
Your character follows you. Your reputation follows you.
That's correct.
That's a good way to put it. So, in my latest book, I Am, I Have, my new book is We Discover Character, redefining character. There's 40 days in that journey. And so part of those, I call it the circle of character, the flywheel of it, starts out with a discovery that you need to work on yourself, right? It's a purpose. So if you would share a little bit about you were a young lad and you worked for your dad, and he instilled some character in you, obviously. Talk about discipline, if you would. That's one of the characters I think that's really premier right now.
Yeah, well, any business owner, but quite frankly, any worker
Right.
needs to have inside of them some intrinsic discipline. They have to be able to get up in the morning and go to work.
Yeah.
And when you're the boss, it's even more critical.
That's right.
Because there's not anybody driving you to do that. So that discipline has to be internal, and you have to be able to get up and make that next sales call, get up and go do what has to happen every single day.
Yeah.
And from a discipline standpoint, what I found is that I would always work off of a list. And it wasn't a calendar like you've got this appointment here and this appointment here.
Good.
It was an actual list that I prepared the night before of the things that I had to accomplish and do the next day.
Good.
And then I would look at that list and I would take the things that were most difficult and I would move them to the top of the list.
Okay.
Because I knew that if I was disciplined to do the hardest things in my workday first, as I went through the workday, my day got easier.
Right.
And so what happened when I got home, I was less stressful around my wife, I was less stressful with my children, and all those things worked better because I did the hard things first.
Balance.
Every single day.
You talked about going to divinity school as a young guy.
Yeah, that was actually something that my parents really pushed with all of us. All
Sure.
of the kids, there were 6 sons in our family. I'm the youngest of 6. Every single one went to divinity school.
So your father was a Baptist
Minister, right.
And so he instilled some godly values, some character traits in you. Tell us, as you went to the school or during your life journey, where you felt like you met your higher power, your God that you serve.
It wasn't. There was not this single life-changing moment.
Okay.
Like a lot of people, their relationship with God changes because some tragedy or some failure happens in their life and they're
Right.
drawn to that as a way of finding redemption. Whereas I grew up in a home that everything about what was around us in our daily culture was surrounded and imbued with these Christian values that my parents followed. And I remember even from the youngest of ages, every single day, 7 days a week, including Sundays, my parents had a private devotional time with all the kids where my dad would sit us all down together before I went to school, before I went to church, before on Saturdays we went and did our chores, before anything else happened in a day, that happened first. And so that's been a lifelong continuation for me.
What you're talking about is fathering. Fathering is an area of life that we lack in our country, I can see, because of busyness and having to provide and, divorce and things like this. Many grow up without a dad. And so that's what Roofers United, it's part of our vision, is to father new business owners, to mentor them and spiritually speak into their lives and have a fellowship. If we can have a fellowship in a community where we're thriving and pouring character into them. For example, we have a Christian Men's Fellowship with Jim Johnson and a Wednesday prayer call. And just last Wednesday, we talked about how there are 5 C's that we could do better with character. One of those was confidence. Another was courage. Can you tell me a time in your life when you were in business where courage had to take the forefront and you had to step through your fears and how you got through that?
Sure, and I want to just step back one thing because what you said triggered something when you talked about your father. And I think talking about fatherhood is really important, particularly when you're with a group of men.
Right.
But I would tell you that my mother was probably more influential in my life than my dad was.
Wow.
Because my dad was absent for a lot of it because he worked really hard. He did roofing,
Yes.
but he also was a chaplain. And so those things had him away from home a lot. And so much of what I have in me is from her as well. And so I don't want to diminish anything that my mom did in my life as well.
Right.
But from a courage standpoint, I remember probably one of the most courageous things we did was that I decided very early in my career, we were a residential roofing company.
Okay.
And I decided that I wanted to be in the commercial roofing business. But I didn't know anything about the commercial roofing business,
Sure.
and it really got me connected with NRCA.
Mm-hmm.
So I literally, out of the blue, I was not a member of NRCA,
No.
our company wasn't a member, I was just doing research,
Right.
and I called them and said, could you help me?
It's many of the residential roofers have a dream to be commercial someday.
Yeah. But for whatever reason, I actually made more money on a gross profit on my residential side than my commercial side, but that's a whole different deal. That's just how we ran our business. But NRCA was so instrumental because they helped me connect. They connected me with other people that had done what I wanted to do and were where I wanted to be. And they began to, through networking, help mentor me to get me into that. And I remember the very first big commercial job I sold was for a paper mill. I cold called them.
Wow.
Went in and met with them, and they had to re-roof the roof over one of their primary operating paper machines that not only had to replace the roof, but replace the structural deck
Okay.
and keep the machine running. And so that was a big job for a 24-year-old.
Huge. Talking about communication, you're talking about the networking side of that. You had to learn from others who've been there before.
That's
the
correct.
other C, communication. You brought it up. How that is so intrinsic to become who you want to be in your culture, like in your values. When you think about that word communication, sometimes you don't like lead that way, but it happens. Like you were inquisitive and you wanted to be better, and so you asked, and then they helped you find a new way.
Yeah, I did, but the communication was two-directional.
That's right.
I had to ask, and then I had to be willing to hear. And sometimes you'll hear things and you really don't want to hear it. And there's this kind of thing that bugs me today because I see it so much.
Right.
Is people say you're not listening or I'm not feeling heard. And what's really going on is what they're saying to you is you're not agreeing with me. So I'm going to change how I word this, or I'm going to say it louder. I'm going to start yelling at you
Right.
to get you to hear. I really noticed it when I was in Congress. People would say, "You're not listening, Congressman. You're not listening."
Huh.
And I would say, "Yes, I am listening. In fact, I'm intently listening and hearing you. I just disagree. I have a different solution for this problem that you're presenting."
That's good. That's good. So we also live in a culture of distraction and other things that can disseminate communication is cell phones and texts and emails.
Yes.
And so many times we disrespect each other by letting that take precedence when you're in the middle of a talk, right?
Yeah.
So I had to put my airplane mode on for our conversation because I could be getting a lot of calls, but I'm
Yeah.
not. But that is a way that we could garner respect by just face to face, turn off the cell phone,
Right.
and new culture exists there. Tell me, I mean, you're a man of wisdom, obviously.
No, I'll let others make that judgment.
Well, you are to me, and I'm honored you're here. What is your daily ritual when you're seeking counsel from your Father in heaven? You're obviously a believer.
Yeah.
So tell me if some of the things you've learned to seek wisdom, because in Proverbs it talks about the man of wisdom, he seeks that, and she's crying out in the streets.
Yeah.
If we can make our decisions right, usually we'll end up in the right spot.
Yeah, well, I've discovered throughout my life that God speaks to me in different ways and does to you, and it's partly being in tune to the various ways that God Himself communicates.
Right.
So getting up and having a time in His Word, which is how I start my day, typically around 4:30 in the morning.
4:30, yeah.
My wife is still asleep, and I've got the house to myself, and it's quiet. And it provides an opportunity for me to communicate with God in prayer and pray for my kids,
Yes.
my family, my spouse, NRCA, the people I work for,
It was coffee with God.
work with. Yeah, kind of. Although it's a little bit before I start having caffeine.
Good.
But God also speaks to me through family members,
Yes.
through church, through people I work with,
Mm-hmm.
through the admonishments of the day, through
Yeah.
failures and through successes.
Sure.
And if you're willing to see God in all those things, I mentioned when I was a kid, God was just kind of in our circle. It was everything that happened, and I feel that way today. When you allow Him to surround your activity, and it's just part of the normal activity,
That's right.
you're more in tune to hearing Him speak through others.
That's perfect because Psalm 23 talks about King David that the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And it talks about a time where he had to fear no evil and how the Lord would set up a table before him in the presence of his enemies. Let's talk about some challenging circumstances in your life. I've had one. I've had a stroke 3 or 4 years ago, fully recovered from that. But as I went through that dilemma, I was thinking, God, is this it? Is this my last breath? Thank God I had people praying and I came back 100%. Have you had any challenging health situations or business things where maybe near-death experiences, things like this that you can share?
Yeah, well, on the health side, I've had a bit of a struggle with cancer in my life, but nothing that I've felt was life-threatening. Of course, if you don't take care of it, it can become life-threatening.
Right.
And so, but nothing along that way. I've got a family member who's ill. And so you see those types of things, but even in that you see God working in those types of things. And in business life, there are always ups and downs in business life. An employee that gets severely